Problems are going to occur on a construction project. That's not the issue. Not planning for them or pretending they might not is where the issue. So that's first. You need to check and make sure the entire capital stack, the financing, however the developer, the owner of a project, whatever it is, that they have all of their financing in place before you start. That's the second mistake. When you bid it to perfection, anytime something goes wrong and you have no contingencies built in or very minimal contingencies, it's going to accelerate the burn, accelerate the pain. Yes, you have the invoice, but you spent more. So now your cash flow is tight and now it's starting to impact the rest of the business. So what did you do? Make sure you have terms in the contract that will allow you to stop work without being accused of abandoning the job or forfeiting the job. Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Construction MF'ers podcast. I am Scott Peper, founder and CEO of Mobilization Funding, and today you got just me, and we are going to talk about how I learned construction cash flow the hard way. I'm going to start with a story. We had a contractor building a parking garage. Think like parking garage for a huge car dealership. And so it was going to be nice. It was very organized. It was a great project in a great area with a great general contractor. The problems that existed and how it started was twofold. Actually, it's probably more than two, but I'm going to touch on a few key things and where things went wrong. Now, this isn't a story about why a commercial subcontractor is bad or did something wrong. This is just a story of how things are done. And as a commercial subcontractor in any specialty, this is going to be specifically block and concrete, but in any specialty, how and why you need to be paying attention to these key things so that you don't get stuck in the same scenario, especially dirt world or early other specialty contractors. This is key for you to hear. So projects coming out of the ground, we got a good solid $5-6 million subcontract. It's going to be a large parking garage with a lot of different cars. It's going to be built on a brand new car dealership. We've probably all seen these new car dealerships, great amount of inventory. Here's where things started to go wrong. The owner of the project, the car dealer, is excited. They're going to have to put a lot of equity onto the project, but they're also getting their bank financing in place. No big deal. Totally normal, different structure. Totally a normal structure. However, as you all know, in this banking environment, in this financing climate, it is vastly different than it was 4, 5, 6 years ago. Money is not cheap. Banks pocketbooks are not wide open. They're not looking for things that they want to finance. They're looking for the perfect things to finance. They're looking for ways to say no more than they're looking for ways to say yes. And again, that is not a reflection on banks. That doesn't mean banks are bad. That's just the economic climate we're in, and that's the world that we're all living in. And as a contractor, you need to live in that too. So how does that impact you? Well, here's a great reason. Well, how? You have a great owner of a very profitable and good car dealership, building a brand new car dealership. However, they need to get financing. Now, they have the equity in place. Equity could be, if it's a $10 million project, they might need to put in $2, $3, $4 million. So they have the money to get the project started. They need the balance of that capital stack is what it's called in the terms of the loan that they're going to use. Well, if that loan doesn't close, it's going to be really hard to finish building the parking garage. And if in order for that loan to close, we have to get budgets in place, material costs. You have to buy out the work, stuff you all are very accustomed to living with. In this particular case, car dealer, developer, the owner, they wanted to get things going faster. So they started the project, assuming, like the rest of the environment we've been in, that the bank would come along and get the bank closed. So out goes our specialty contractor. They're starting to do the work. They're getting the parking garage out. They're doing their pre-work, their submittals. They're getting all the pre-construction costs estimated, and they even got onto the site for the first month. And then all of a sudden, there's a couple of delays. The first pay app doesn't get paid. The developer, the owner, is now telling them that they don't have the right proper financing in place, and they're waiting for their bank line to close. Now, they still have the cash, but they're at a point where they're not comfortable spending more of the cash until they can get the bank financing in place. But yet they've had everybody go out to work. So here's the first problem. You need to check and make sure the entire capital stack, the financing, however the developer, the owner of a project, whatever it is, that they have all of their financing in place before you start. That's ideal. If you decide to start without having it all in place. You need to be paying attention to when it does get in place and know that you are working at risk, at a higher risk than as if you weren't working prior, or if you were not working and they had the financing in place. So those are the things you want to know. If they have the financing in place, less risky. If they don't have the financing in place, it's okay to go work, but just know you're doing it at a higher risk. That was the first mistake. Second mistake was the commercial contractor, the concrete folks, they bid this job to perfection, meaning they bid it as if there was never going to be any problems. There might not be any delays. Material costs aren't going to go up. My sub-labor is going to do it in the perfect amount of time. It might not take them extra weeks. That's the second mistake. When you bid it to perfection, anytime something goes wrong and you have no contingencies built in or very minimal contingencies, it's going to accelerate the burn, accelerate the pain, and that is exactly what happened here. Those are the key two things that really made mistakes that were overestimated, in my opinion. This can happen to anybody, even the best of the businesses. And again, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't take these jobs. It means you should go into these jobs eyes wide open, knowing that you are taking them at a higher risk rate and a higher risk level than might otherwise be on a different type of job. And that's all okay as long as you've planned for it, budgeted for it, and you're being paid for the risk in your margin or the work that you're performing, or you're making sure you don't get to certain levels of the work that you're comfortable with without getting paid. So how did the pain show up for the commercial contractor? Well, first, once there was a delay in payment, that meant you have to push out payments that you didn't otherwise anticipate. You need to pay your sub-labor. You need to make sure you keep that sub-laborer available to you. So even though you're not back on the job, or you're saying, maybe I shouldn't go on the job, you want to keep that subcontract labor available so they don't go to another project or work for another customer of theirs. Because if they do start the job, now you're stuck. So now you're floating an extra week or 2 weeks worth of labor. Second big concern that occurred was you actually did more work than you anticipated doing, and you got a great start on it, which meant a lot more cost went out. So now you have more cost out, more of your own money out on the job before you were actually paid. And you thought that it was going to be just fine because you were going to be able to invoice more money than you would have otherwise thought you could have in the first or second month of the job. But now that those aren't paying, you have the double whammy. Yes, you have the invoice, but you spent more. So now your cash flow is tight, and now it's starting to impact the rest of the business. So what did you do? The next thing they did was the real third mistake, is they went and got bad debt to fill the cash flow gap. That bad debt they had to do in an urgent matter because they hadn't properly planned for these things. And that created an even bigger cash flow issue, which now, instead of having a cash flow issue on just that project that was impacting just your subcontractors, now it's impacting your entire business. And now you've added more debt to the entire business in a poor structure. This particular case, it happened to be a merchant cash advance. So now you have more money going out, more money coming out back out of your account to service that debt, and yet you still haven't been paid. So here's how one project from an owner who had not had proper financing in place, by a perfectly bid job that you bid to perfection, and as soon as there was a delay or an issue, it accelerated another problem, turned into you having to pay a couple extra weeks of labor on the project that you wouldn't have otherwise had to do, which then created a downfall on the entire business and stressed the cash flow because you put too much cash out of that job and not enough coming out. Then you made an additional error by getting debt onto the business that accelerated further cash flow issues when you had to repay that debt. And then the ultimate problem occurred when the owner decided that they did get their financing and they closed it, but that your contracted price was too high and too much for them to continue with. So what did they try to do? They tried to renegotiate your contract. And when you didn't renegotiate your contract, or you couldn't, they also slowed down payments and tried to apply pressure to you. That pressure then created a situation where now this particular contractor was out almost $1 million, owed about $1.5 million, and they could not, and they were now fighting and arguing over the money they needed to pay their suppliers, and they were fighting over how much work they had actually gotten done, and now the whole schedule of value is being scrutinized because the owner's trying to get the material and the work done for a lower cost because they had to get it within their financing to meet their bank requirements. So what happened? Well, the owner paid all the material lien holders, of course, right straight out of the gate. And then what was left was the $400,000 or $500,000 that was in profit, an additional $200,000 or $300,000 that was in the soft costs, the pre-submittals, all the pre-construction costs. And so who got hurt? Well, the material suppliers got paid, but now there was a lawsuit for all the costs and expenses that were lienable items, but they were arguing over the contracted items in that. And so now that commercial subcontractor is in pain. That's what we're trying to avoid. So I tell you this story so that you can see the lessons on how something so simple and so easy, or may not even be paying attention to from your perspective, can trickle down all the way to the project, all the way to you, all the way to your business. And if you don't catch these things in advance and pay attention to some of these issues as they arise, how that can ultimately impact your whole overall business and really hurt you, not just on one project, but overall. All right, so there's no good story without a solution. So key piece, what do we do? How do we avoid that? All right, I'm going to give you a couple quick bullet points here, and this is exactly in retrospect how you can manage these crises. First and foremost, do not bid your projects to perfection. It is important and critical that you make sure you understand the risk you are taking and you are paid properly for that risk. And the way to do that is to make sure you build in some contingencies. Assess the risk properly and then build in your contingencies to fit that. If it's a brand new relationship and you never worked for an owner before, or this developer or this general contractor, that's a risk. If it's a general contractor you've worked with many, many times, you've been to war with, and you guys have had your problems and you've worked them out, less risky, okay? The problems are going to occur on a construction project. That's not the issue. Not planning for them or pretending they might not is where the issue. So that's first. Second, you should always find out if the financing on the job, what's going to ultimately pay for the project, the bank financing, the owner's financing, the equity, however it's being paid for, you should make sure that's in place. And if it's not in place before you start, you should make sure that you have a critical check down periods of where you're going to get that information from, how you're going to get that information, and make sure you have stopping points that you know you're comfortable with, that you're not going to work past a certain point without making sure that financing's in place. Whether that's getting paid for the first pay app, whether that's only working for 30 days on a certain job, and communicate that in your contract. Put things in your contract that if financing is not in place or if contracts are not put together, that you will be able to terminate your contract and you will be paid for what work you have in place. So you can at least make sure you have terms in the contract that will allow you to stop work without being accused of abandoning the job or forfeiting the job. That's the second critical thing you can do. And then third, it's really important to build out your cash flows of your project so that you can take the bid that you put onto the project, you can then take the schedule that you're supposed to keep, what you're anticipating billing and the costs and your terms, so that when you do have material suppliers that are ready to be paid in 30 days, but you haven't been paid yet, you know what those cash flow requirements are going to be. So you know that, okay, you know what, as planned, if it goes perfectly, I need to invest this many dollars into the project. And if it doesn't go perfectly, if it pushes an extra week, or if I don't get paid this week, I actually have some wiggle room with my suppliers. Okay, cool. If that happens and it goes a little farther out, then I actually have an extra couple, 10, 15 points in here that I can actually put into the project to make sure I'm paid. But you want to know those things in advance, because if you go into a project thinking that you're going to have to infuse X amount of dollars, and when you get out into the middle of the project and problems occur, you realize that you had X times $3 already, times 3x the amount of dollars into the project. That can create a lot of extra anxiety and pressure on you. And if you know that in advance, it'll help you know proactively where those pain points are going to be so that you can use those as your checkdowns. I hope those 3 tips helped. I hope you see how this story could impact you. I hope you see that this isn't an issue that cannot happen on a project, an issue that very much can. It's not an issue that you need to go ask all these questions in advance. This is an issue that you need to be aware of. These are the things and questions that I hope you learn from this story that I'm telling, so that you don't have to live this story yourself and learn that lesson. particularly in our case as a lender, we actually learned a lesson in this story. We learned a few lessons, all of which I just articulated to you, and we learned them right alongside our client. But when I say right alongside, I mean our client didn't get paid and we didn't get paid. And so that was a problem. And that was a lesson I just explained to you that has a certain price tag to it, that I hope you can take my pain point, my client's pain point, and collectively learn from that. My gift to you. I hope that is. Now, the way you can return that favor to me is don't let these problems happen to you. Ask these questions, make these notes. If you found any value in this, share it with as many possible people as you can so they can learn from this story and they don't have to live it themselves. I wish you guys all the best, and God bless you. Have a great week.